Hi, and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Today, we're stepping back in time to 1940s Bulgaria to uncover the untold stories of the Jewish community during World War II, a once vibrant community whose experiences have long been overlooked. My guest is oral historian and internationally acclaimed filmmaker Jacky Comforty, co-creator of the upcoming exhibit Stories We Were Never Told, Visualizing the Holocaust in Bulgaria and Beyond. Developed in collaboration with artist Martha Aladjem Bloomfield, this project, begun in 2021, features 50 original paintings alongside survivor testimonies, oral histories, photographs, and years of archival research. Together, they connect Bulgaria's Holocaust experience to the broader context of World War II, revealing the full historical reality from life before the war and anti-Semitism to resistance, deportations, and survival. Through photographs, archival films, and interviews with survivors and eyewitnesses, Jacky and Martha have woven together an under-researched chapter of Balkan history. Visitors will journey from Jewish life before the war to acts of defiance in 1943 that saved tens of thousands from deportation to the Treblinka concentration camp. But before we get into our conversation, a quick reminder: if you enjoy this program, subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and to watch all of our past episodes, and to follow us on Facebook to stay updated with all of our latest content. The son of Bulgarian Jewish Holocaust survivors, Jacky Comforty is an award-winning, multidisciplinary, multicultural, and multilingual filmmaker, oral historian, and media creator. He's devoted his career to documenting this history through award-winning films made in the United States, Germany, Israel, and Bulgaria, including 3 full-length documentaries that focus on the Holocaust in Bulgaria. The exhibit is part of a larger project, including a book and a film dedicated to the memory of Bulgaria's Holocaust victims, exploring Jewish life before the war, the rise of Nazi influence, and acts of resistance and resilience. The full story of the Jewish community living in Bulgaria during this time has never been researched this extensively or told until now. Jacky, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we dive into your family's story, I just want to make this note that one of B'nai B'rith's earliest lodges in Europe was actually established in Bulgaria in 1899. I think it was in Plovdiv, along with a number of others. I think at a certain point we had 10 or 11 lodges in Bulgaria up until the time of the war and the Holocaust. And there still is an active lodge in the capital, Sofia. And Jacky and I have worked together before. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. And again, Jacky, it's good to have you back.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we should remind our listeners that most Jews in Bulgaria were of Sephardic origin. It's the Balkans. I'm curious to hear about your own family. Your parents lived in Bulgaria during the Holocaust years. Did their stories in any way inspire your work on this topic? And what were their experiences before and during the war?
I started my career as a comedy scriptwriter director, and I was very close to my parents, who, after retiring as architects, went to study film at the Tel Aviv University so that we can play and do creative work together. And they used to come and visit me. I lived in the 80s in Germany, and they used to come and visit me. And every summer, we will do little no-budget comedies with my parents together. And one day they said, there's one story that's important for you to tell, and that's how we survived during the Holocaust. And I didn't know anything up to that point about this. And I put a little audio tape inside the recording machine, and they started telling stories. And so this was very fascinating for me. And then my parents started collecting material for me in the library and at the Museum of the Jewish Heritage, it was called at that time. And I started reading more and more, did some research first in Germany, But then I engaged in a big oral history project. By that time, my father was not alive anymore, so I became aware of the fact that I have so many questions now, and there's nobody to answer them. And so this awareness of the time that is passing and the fact that pretty soon there will not be a lot of people to answer questions motivated me to do a major oral history project. Over the year, I started with about 55 people in Israel and about 45 or so in Bulgaria. But then over the years, I kept collecting more material, and I've interviewed over 160 people. And then I also interviewed all the experts that I met, and went and visited all the different locations where things were happening. So I was able to develop a certain skills that were not really existing before. I researched photographs, but because I was in different locations, I was able to identify where those Holocaust photographs that Yad Vashem has come from. They were always mislabeled. And I also did, or I did in Bulgaria. I spent 3 months there during the time that the first democratic elections took place. And it was a rare moment where all the doors were open widely and everyone wanted to help. And I was like in a frenzy of collection because I kept finding things, and it felt like I'm on Treasure Island and I don't have enough pockets to stuff with things that I find. It was a very, very strange sensation for me because I was not necessarily a collector that gets into a collection frenzy. But I could not stop, and I put my hands on I had an assistant that went to 20 different archives and libraries, and I copied everything I could on film basically, and on it was before digital images. So it took forever to organize this material, and I went to make a little movie, but the task was bigger than that. So it took me for a while to realize how much I don't know, how much I need to learn, how careful I have to be with what I phrase, because the quote was, there was no Holocaust in Bulgaria when I started. And my parents also were caught up by that feeling that there was no Holocaust in Bulgaria, and they were playing down the suffering they had because it wasn't Auschwitz. So his whole feeling of, because it wasn't Auschwitz, there was nothing happened to us. It was a little bit, on one way, exaggerated, but also extremely exploited by Bulgarian government, trying to whitewash what happened during the war, trying to deny any responsibility for deportation of Jews that Bulgaria engaged in. And it was just a lot of misrepresentation and misinformation. And I was just being very, very careful, stepping one step at a time. I didn't want to embarrass myself with making statements that are not validated. And because I'm not an historian, I was very shy about it. And then at a certain point, after continuing, I finished one film and then did another one, and then it just kept intriguing me, the subject. It just would not go away. And I kept recording and filming, and I had a feeling that I have a certain understandings that are not common, and I need to find ways to share them. And the films, even though they reflect it, people don't quite get it because we look always at film as some form of entertainment, and people didn't understand that it was really carefully placed, every element, like in a archaeological reproduction of some kind of a pot that was shattered or so.
So, Jacky, one of your motivations, the chief motivation for telling these stories, is challenging common misconceptions about the Holocaust era and how it affected Bulgaria. You made an early film, a couple of documentaries about the Bulgarian Jewish story in that period years ago. Now, between then and today, does this represent all the work that you've done? This will be represented in the exhibit and in the new work that you've done?
I would say in some way less my own path. The purpose of the exhibition was there were a lot of events where we had documentation, visual documentation, and I was able to place and understand what is the visual documentation. But there were a lot of testimonies where we didn't have any visual documentation. And I thought that visualizing those stories will have an impact on understanding how severe the situation was. And so with Martha Aladjem Bloomfield, we are in creative contact for 10 years. We have worked since 1917 on our previous book that is called The Stolen Narrative of the Bulgarian Jews and the Holocaust, which was finally putting down all the information I had and making a contact a little bit between the Holocaust in Bulgaria and events in all over Europe, and placing the Holocaust in Bulgaria in the timeline of the evolution of the final solution and the various development of killing technology, methodologies of collection of people, killing centers, and so on. So this was very important to place Bulgaria in this context, because it was always denied. Bulgaria was always different, and the people who researched it looked at it as a different. Nobody spoke Bulgarian, so it was very hard to research Bulgarian documents. The documents that were very accessible from the start were the documents in German, which really presented the point of view of Germany versus the Holocaust in Bulgaria. But there was always a certain denial and disconnect. And the exhibition now is trying to create situations that we have testimonies for, but no visual representation. And by creating those situations, like for example, there was an expulsion of 5,000 Jews in 1939, just 2.5 weeks after World War II began. 5,000 Jews who lived and were born in Bulgaria but didn't have a Bulgarian citizenship were expelled to a no man's land or no people's land between Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, where they were abused. Some people were killed, and for a long period, some of them were forced to go on a rickety boats and be expelled. The boat that sunk. There were a lot of tragedies that were not counted. One of the arguments about trying to compare that there was no Holocaust in Bulgaria says there were more Jews after the Holocaust than before. But it is based on a statistic manipulation. It doesn't count the Jews that were in Bulgaria until 1939. It exists in Bulgarian documents. They say the Commissar for Jewish Affairs reports and says until 1939 we had 52,000 Jews. We deported 5,000 of them in 1939. Then in 1943 we annexed territories that Germany conquered and has given us, where we declared our sovereignty. And so the Bulgarian Jews at that time were counted as 63,000. And some of these communities in these occupied annexed territories were some of the biggest Jewish communities counted in the Bulgarian Statistic Almanac on 1942 as one of the biggest communities. Then they were deported in 1943, about 12,000 Jews, a little less than 12,000. Some other Jews were deported, Bulgarian Jews who were in Paris. Bulgaria allowed Germany to deport Bulgarian citizens who were in occupied Europe. Other allies were not so generous with giving up their sovereignty and allowing Germany to deport their Jews. So this is the manipulation of the numbers. It doesn't count the people who were expelled, and it doesn't count the people who were annexed and then deported.
I want to go back to the history in just a moment, but let's pick up on the exhibition, because it features, you're talking about, you have testimonies, but you don't have a lot of photographic, or you don't have photographic evidence to go with it. The exhibit features 50 paintings inspired by the survivor testimonials. So how did you and Martha Bloomfield work together to present a fuller, more accurate picture of what happened during the war? Tell me how the paintings have are telling the story along with what you are providing in terms of the testimonies.
It was a little more like working on a fiction film, where in a fiction film you are trying to put together a scene with people, with actors, with set designers, with camera people. And here I had Martha that I could say, okay, let's talk about what's in this painting. And so there was a clear idea of the events. Some of the events, multiple paintings tell it. And some of them, all the locations where those events were, I visited. So I knew how the landscape looks, and I could show Martha also images of the landscape. I could show her a map. I could show her things that look the same. What would Bulgarian military dresses look like, or uniforms? What would the police uniforms look like? What would these people have? There's so many different some of them major dramatic events that have many details, hundreds of people in one painting. Martha is extremely tenacious and hardworking and extremely gifted, and she created massive scenes with many people in there, and it has a very strong impact. Her style is a little naive, which is wonderful because we really do not want too much detail on atrocities, but the situations are covered. And so it shows things that happen in Bulgaria, things that happen in France, things that happen in the occupied territories, the effects that Bulgaria's occupation had on these territories, not just on Jewish citizens, but on non-Jews. And so that was really important to be able to tell a full picture, and especially focus on the bad things and the atrocities that were somehow always whitewashed.
The project is based primarily on interviews and oral histories. Tell us who you spoke with. Were these mostly survivors? Because the biological clock here is running out. Eyewitnesses, family members, diaries. Where did you go to get these testimonies?
Well, when I started, there were still a lot of people who were alive and who were adults during the war who can provide accurate information. So I've interviewed some people who were in their 80s and some people were in the early 90s in 1990 when I started this project. Over the years, there was always less and less people to interview. So I think my interviews with second generation, they had little bit. I mean, those who were children during the war were great, but those who were born in like 1941, they barely have much of a memory as a 2-3-year-old during the war. So they may have one memory, or they may have. So I've collected those, but I did the oral histories. I read the book, and I have a library of 500 books that cover what happened in the Balkans and that I collected over the years. You could build a museum around my collection. I have more than 10,000 photographs. Probably a dozen of hours of archival footage from Bulgaria. And so I developed a certain sensitivity to this material visually, and I've done this type of visual history, which is now a term. I was engaging in this before the terminology existed, and have somehow had to pioneer, in a way, working methodologies for myself, how to handle photographs, how to archive them, how to preserve them. Also, I had to develop methodology for interviewing people. When I started, there was the 14th of methodology from Yale School of how to interview survivors. You give them a questionnaire, you interview them in a studio with a black background. I felt was not an authentic kind of documentation. Nobody can prevent. I thought then in 200 years, somebody being filmed in front of black screen and say, I just escaped from here or there. Here's my testimony. So I went to interview people in their homes and in the places where it has a certain stamp of authenticity of where they live or what the time is. I stopped giving questionnaires to people and developed an individualized way of listening to everyone and letting them tell their story rather than me trying to make them tell me what I need to hear.
I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, Jacky, in one of your earlier documentaries, I recall, for example, you must have the footage that some of those interviews, most of those people are gone, I'm sure. But I recall in particular, you interviewed a Bulgarian Orthodox priest. And I think he was maybe in a home at that point. He was already an elderly man. And it was a profound moment in that documentary, because here you had an eyewitness who clearly, even at an advanced age, remembered everything, and it was quite moving. So I'm sure you still have that as part of your inventory, and you use some of this, correct?
Absolutely. I feel, look, I started making a film, but then my responsibility grew beyond that. I realized that I'm the curator of the subject. There's no other collection anywhere that is being by any institution that takes care of it. And I have this Israeli upbringing of youth movement. And so when everyone says, who volunteers to put a finger in the wall to stop the flood? I have this upbringing. So I was drawn into the vacuum and was drawn to preserve this. I am very lucky I received a grant to catalog my collections. I was all the time trying to do it at my own expense, and I had limits to my resources. And at the same time, I was also an outsider. I was not a historian, part of an institution. So people didn't quite understand the importance of the materials I was lucky to collect. But now there is, finally, I'm so happy. I think the book changed the situation because people can relate better to books than to films. And I think that the book changed a little bit the appreciation to the volume of work and collection, and I'm continuing it.
Let's talk now about the Jewish community in Bulgaria. The exhibit begins with Jewish life before the war and the community's integration into Bulgarian society. The Jewish community was an interesting community. It was, to a certain extent, very much working class, and also a very highly cultured community, a lot of writers and poets, musicians and composers. So tell us about that community, let's say in 1939, and was anti-Semitism prevalent in pre-World War II Bulgaria?
The first Jews lived in Bulgaria before Bulgarians came. So in a way, Jews were not considered ever as foreigners. They were sort of the people of the land. The Bulgarian Jewish community is actually a melting pot of 4 different Jewish cultures. There's Romaniot Jews, who were the Jews of the Byzantine Empire, who spoke a Jewish Greek language. There were Jews who came from the Orient and or Arab countries or the Mesopotamia. So who had like their own Jewish Arabic language. And then there was the Sephardic Jews, and there were Ashkenazi Jews that found shelter there because it was always some kind of an enclave where you could, people who were persecuted minorities as religions could find shelter there. So the community is a melting pot of cultures. Ultimately, most of them spoke Ladino, even though there was a huge part of the community that was Ashkenazi also, but they mixed up. They were of all different social classes. They were day laborers, and you could find factory owners. There were not a lot of rich Bulgarian Jews, but there were a few, and there was a very established, I would say, middle class and upper middle class in the cities mostly. As Bulgaria received its citizenship and became independent in the late 19th century, Ladino disappeared. Until then, Ladino was the main language of the community, and Turkish was the business language. Then other languages started coming. Alliance Française came to Bulgaria, and so they were speaking French. And then also the generation of my parents, who were born in the 20s, about 100 years ago, they wanted to speak Bulgarian, the worldly language, and not Spanish, the community kind of provincial language. So my parent generation did not really want to speak Ladino. They understood it, but they tried to speak Bulgarian. So this was the situation in the eve of World War II. There was not much anti-Semitism, although there was anti-Semites as individual, and there was also a young Nazi party, but it was not, anti-Semitism is when it's an official type of policy. And anti-Semitism was not there until late 30s.
Jacky, there's been over the years a great debate over, and you've outlined how there was the deportation of the 5,000, and of course the 11,300 Macedonian and Thracian Jews who were under Bulgarian military administration. But the debate has always been about how were the tens of thousands, because you've gone through the numbers, but let's call it tens of thousands. How was it that the tens of thousands were able to survive this? Who was outside? We have Jewish resistance, and then outside there were friends. How did it all happen? What is your conclusion?
Well, first of all, I think that the main reason I would call it friendship. On the basic level, many friendships between individual Jews and individuals Bulgarian. They were not separated. So a lot of the Jews had Bulgarian classmates and were involved. And so once the anti-Jewish laws came, there were, before that, in the early 30s, there were some public trials about people who were accused of anti-Semitism. So during the 30s, the Jewish community became aware of who are the allies and the friends to the same mindset philosophically, and who were tolerant. And then they were also using personal friends to have involvement over the situation. So for example, the Jewish community had designated people to talk and be in contact with the highest authorities of the church. The Bulgarian church was a major force in resistance to the anti-Jewish law and to anti-Semitism. And they got into confrontation with the king, and they made protests, and they did not remain, they were very vocal about it. Also, there was a vice president of the parliament who really sacrificed his position politically completely, but he exposed the plans to deport, which were secret. Once the secret was out and was not a secret anymore, it was difficult to complete the deportations. So the involvement of many individuals that were activated through the I would say the oversight of the Jewish community, they were very activist. That helped. Then there was within the Jewish community different directions. So, for example, the leadership did not want to do a demonstration against deportation, they were afraid it will be counterproductive. But the leaders, the popular leaders of the religious leaders were those who initiated an anti-deportation demonstration in May 24th, 1943, a unique example of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. And 10,000 people, is said from testimonies, have participated in this demonstration. And then the Jews were deported out of the main city, but never got deported outside of the Bulgarian borders. Also, the continuation and the development of the war influenced that, and the death of the king, who had a heart failure and died in August 43, marked the end of the attempts to deport the Jews from Bulgaria. But 2 days after the king died, Bulgaria gave an official note to Germany that further deportation will not take place.
You know, it's interesting. I just tell a quick anecdote. I was in Houstonville, which was a center of this resistance, which is a provincial town. And I was there for, it might have been the 40th anniversary or the 50th anniversary of the salvation of Bulgarian Jewry. And it was a big event in the town square, and there were speakers. And after the program was over, and one of the speakers, in fact, was the foreign minister, then foreign minister of Bulgaria, Solomon Pasi, a woman ran out of the crowd, and she was speaking animatedly with Pasi, and then she went over to the representative from the Israeli embassy. And I was really fascinated. Well, what would she be saying? And I went up and I asked after, and you know what the answer was? This woman came up to the Israeli to say the following. She had Jewish girlfriends. They were classmates. After the war, they left, probably in the late 40s. She wanted to know, could the Israeli diplomat help her to find the friends that she had lost? This was a Bulgarian woman, it's not a Jewish woman. So what you say about friends, I think it's an important element in the story, which probably existed in some cases in other countries who were affected by the Holocaust, but certainly not, I don't think, to the extent that existed in Bulgaria. I want to ask you again about the exhibition, because really I think this is something which is extremely important, and we certainly want people who are going to be, and I'll tell the details in a minute about where you can see it. The exhibit artwork serves as a backdrop for the documents, for the photos, for the film footage, and the oral histories, as we've discussed. What do you think the most important takeaway you hope visitors will leave with? How will it deepen their understanding of the Holocaust generally in Central and Eastern Europe and in the Balkans, and specifically about Bulgaria?
I would like to be able to connect Bulgaria to the general view of the Holocaust and connect it. The name of the exhibition is visualizing the Holocaust in Bulgaria and beyond. So I would like people to look at Bulgaria as part of the European project called the Holocaust. I'd like them to be exposed, because the thing is that Bulgaria's government have used this subject and have for positive PR, trying to deny responsibility for certain things. And I felt that our narrative was stolen. So this is part of what I call the reclaimed narrative. We're really trying to reclaim our narrative. And for the first time, there were maybe, I think, at least half a dozen, if not more, Bulgarian official exhibitions trying to portray a picture that was not accurate and was basically denying the Holocaust in some ways. So I felt like we're trying to reclaim our narrative, and we're trying to tell it the way it was through the voices of survivors. And we'd like to create this visual background and explain, for example, in many of the paintings, we explain what is the image that inspired it. Or we also have a book. So in the book, we have a lot more detail about what inspired what. For many years, I felt like I failed the subject. I felt like I have so much material. I have so much understanding, and I just could not really share it. I hope that with this project is going to be also the fourth film and the exhibition and the second book. I feel now a little less that heavy weight and feeling that I failed the subject is no longer there. I feel much more calm about it, and then I can devote my attention to other places in my work that I feel that I failed and I need to do more.
Well, the exhibit is scheduled to open in January of 2026 at the Holocaust Memorial Research and Education Center in Maitland, Florida. Now, since the exhibit can travel, Jacky, will you be using replicas for display at other venues, or will it be shown elsewhere? Will it travel? What do you have in mind?
We have a few options. One is to travel with the original, which makes it a little more costly. The other one is to have a traveling exhibition with just replication of the art. And a third option is for organizations that are far remotely to be able to self-produce the panels and be able to also, another element that we have going to have in the exhibition is embedded video in the panels. We'll have little QR codes where you can scan and then you can hear testimony. So it gives it a little more visual and a little more vocal and personal feeling. So this I hope to be able to do remotely, so that if we have, let's say, a place, and also it is also modular, the exhibition. So not all places that may want to have the subject may be able to display all 50 paintings. So we have 3 different modules. We have a module of life before the war. We have a module of resistance. This special event of the demonstration is the unique example of resistance that is very important. So we have all these modules of the exhibition, and so we hope to be able to get the word out.
Well, final question. After working for years on this project, I should say you've been really working for decades on the subject, but years on this project. How has it influenced your own identity? You've talked about this kind of weight being lifted from your shoulders as it connects to you as a Bulgarian Jew and to Bulgaria's Jewish history.
It was, for me, it was a permanent process of growth. And then I had to develop my own working methodologies. So I was very insecure about what I do. And I really, when you make films, it's so easy to preserve some silly things that I may have said, and it stays there forever, ever to embarrass me. So my main concern was not to expose my ignorance and not to embarrass myself. And the way to do it, you see, when I started working on a project, somebody asked me what it is about, and I said, "Oh, it's about how there was no Holocaust in Bulgaria." And when these words came out of my mouth, I said, "Wait a minute, how can you say such thing? You haven't started even your research, and you already have conclusions." And that was for me right in the beginning a reminder that I need to be careful what I say and what I state, to not be inaccurate, to not embarrass myself. So it was a long process of gaining trust in my judgment, and in then being able to be opinionated. I didn't want to deal with the subject. There was always a subject: who saved the Bulgarian Jews? Which was a manipulative question that already had the answer before the question was formed. So I tried to avoid all these pitfalls. And so it was a process of growth, but I think doubting yourself is always an important process of being creative. And I also welcome criticism. I think criticism is the best way to rise to the occasion. So I welcome critical input. Usually film people don't like to have critical input in the process. And I welcome it because the harder the tasks are, the more crystallized the solutions, I feel.
Well, stories we were never told, visualizing the Holocaust in Bulgaria and beyond, will be on view at the Holocaust Memorial Research and Education Center in Maitland, Florida, from January through July of 2026. The exhibit will feature archival footage, photographs, and 50 paintings, bringing to light powerful, often overlooked stories of Jewish resilience in Bulgaria and in Eastern Europe. Jacky, thank you for joining us today and for sharing these authentic accounts of the Bulgarian Jewish experience during the Holocaust with our viewers. It's been a real pleasure seeing you again and speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Dan. My pleasure. And I hope if people are interested in the exhibition to go in other places, I hope they can contact us, maybe via Maybrit. If there's any responses, I'll be glad if you guys can forward to me.
Very good. Well, thank you again, Jacky.
Thank
Well,
you
that's
so
it for today's episode of Conversations with B'nai B'rith. Thank you once again to our guest, Jacky Comforty, for documenting these untold stories and ensuring that they're never forgotten. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Share this episode with others, post about it on social media, and leave us a comment or a rating. To stay updated, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for more great content. We'll be back soon with more thoughtful conversations on Jewish history, culture, and the issues that matter most to our community. Until then, I'm Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for listening and take care.